I don't know. Whatever you think about government, what's important is that we have an open debate about that. In fact, an open debate about everything. And traditionally, that's what universities were supposed to be about, the open debate. But college campuses these days often are not. And there are two reasons for that. One is that there are some uptight colleges that have speech codes. Here's what you can't say. And two, some campuses are now so liberal that conservatives and libertarians are ostracized if they speak up and say what they believe. Hadley Heath had experience along those lines. You were a student here. You graduated
2010.
A couple of years ago. And Robert Shipley studies free speech in colleges all around America. He's with a group called FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education.
Thanks for having me.
So Hadley, you first. You weren't very political when you first came. And what happened?
Right, well, I had some opinions, but during that time I really struggled to sort out what I believed and struggled to know when to speak up and felt a lot of times I should be quiet.
You shouldn't speak up because you'd lose friends?
Maybe, but you know, there was a variety of students on the other side of the aisle, so to speak. There were some who were very mature, but then there were some other students on campus who could be pretty loud-mouthed about their opinions, and I think that really overshadows the culture on campus. When there's a small group of students who make a lot of noise, it can be very intimidating for people in the minority view. For example, Congressman Tom Tancredo was invited to our campus. Of course, his speech never happened. Protesters shut down that event.
Not of course, but Tancredo has positions on immigration that you disagree with.
Yeah,
I disagree with. He's
sure, I'm not really
tougher rules.
in alignment with Tom Tancredo's philosophies on every issue. I think he's got some good ideas about tax policy, but then other areas I don't see eye to eye. So I was curious about what he thought, and I wanted to hear him out. I was present that day when the protests shut down the event, but it really impressed something on me when many of the protesters were shouting, "There's no debate, no space for hate." And that really hit home with me that, wow, they honestly don't want to have a debate. There's no debate.
And so he was shouted down.
He was shouted down.
He didn't get to speak.
Right. He couldn't do his event that day. And so that's the sort of thing. And
some protesters were outside the building and they threw rocks through the windows?
Right. And you know, the university reacted and condemned those actions. So again, it wasn't UNC being systematic about discrimination. It was just a handful of people who sort of went rogue and things got out of control. So that was unfortunate. But the thing I took away from that is some people really don't want to have a debate, and some people don't want to hear my views. Some people think my views are so illegitimate or even hateful that I shouldn't say them.
And you go to campuses around the country. Most are liberal for some reason, and other students feel silenced?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. The culture there has become pretty monolithic, and the colleges and universities don't seem to be very interested in doing anything to change that. In fact, if anything, you know, they pass policies and that sort of thing that make it more difficult for students who have minority viewpoints or viewpoints that aren't within the campus mainstream to speak out.
And the professors lean left. One survey of 1,400 college professors found 51% are registered Democrats, which is half the group, so what, but only 14% Republican. In the social sciences, only 6% Republican.
Right. I've seen other data that says college professors, 72% of them nationwide self-identify as liberal, which maybe they don't align with the Democratic Party, but they self-identify as liberal, which is a big disparity between them and the general public.
So you were a junior here when Obama was elected, and the climate was creepy?
You know, it was a little cultish, but I think we all, you know, this wasn't something that just happened at UNC, but on college campuses across the nation.
All right, sometimes it's not just about the attitude. There are actual speech bans. And
that's right.
FIRE rates colleges, green light, yellow light, red light, based on free speech.
That's right.
This university just got demoted.
Well, that's because of two policies that UNC maintains. One is a sexual harassment policy, which is one of the places that, if you attend a college other than UNC, one of the most common places to find a speech code. And for instance, it bans all sexually explicit jokes. You know, so if you've ever told a joke with a sexual theme...
You have a copy. You're a student here, David Dearson, and you ran across this. And what did you find?
One of the policies bans sexually explicit jokes. It bans certain kind of looks, and I think it's very difficult to control the way in which you look at someone. There's also a policy now in the residence halls that says to avoid using the written or spoken word in a way that offends, which is pretty outrageously broad. I think a picture of Mitt Romney would offend 70% of residence hall.
And I was struck by the part that says you may not explicitly or implicitly ask for sex. So
Yeah,
then
I don't know how that
do
works.
you get there?
I think we would all love some advice on it.
And if you have sex, since you can't implicitly or explicitly, is it automatically rape? I would think it raises questions.
Clearly, these policies are not they're not well thought out. And this is what you get with bureaucracy at schools, the same way you get it with bureaucracy in governments.
This school also says we're not going to use the word freshman anymore.
Yeah.
We asked them about that. We want gender-inclusive terms. So it's now frosh, or what's it?
First year, I think, is the
First year.
preferred term.
This is typical? Frequent?
I think it's pretty frequent. You know, we found that 65% of schools, both private and public, have speech codes that either violate the Constitution if it's a public school like UNC, or at a private school would violate the Constitution if it was a public school.
And you've contacted this school. They say they're studying your complaint.
Right, that's the usual answer from almost anyone. Well, we'll think about it, as if the First Amendment is something you can balance against your own concerns. That's not how the law works.
Sometimes you sue, and then
That's right.
almost always they back down.
Now, that's right. You know, whenever fire coordinates a lawsuit, you know, whenever we have, you know, become part of a lawsuit against a red light speech code, that speech code's been struck down by the court.
There's another university down the road, NC State, North Carolina State. Derek Spicer was an RA there. That's a residential advisor for you older folks who don't know what that means. That means you live in the dorm and you help with the younger students.
Yeah, I help students, you know, during move-in. I help them move in. I get settled. I get the building set up. I'm in charge of policy enforcement.
And you were asked to put up a civility code.
Not just put it up, it was actually put on refrigerator magnets, and we had to put them in every single room on the refrigerator so that every resident in a residence hall had to see them.
Well, don't we want civility?
Well, civility in and of itself is not a bad thing, but this obsession with trying to make sure that everyone is civil can hinder debate. Some people are more passionate than others. They get fire in their belly when they have an issue that they feel like they need to stand up for. And it comes across as uncivil to other people, or it might offend some people. Well,
Too bad?
Well, that's the point of a dialogue. It's supposed to offend people. You're supposed to be offended by things that are going wrong with your university or with your country. So I think that a passionate discourse should be encouraged, not discouraged.
And like Derek said, civility is great, and I think most of the time that should be the rule. But, you know, there are certain circumstances in which all of us would agree that civility cannot be the paramount circumstance. When you're dealing with huge societal issues like the civil rights movement, you know, you simply can't accomplish your goals if you're too busy worrying about being civil and not offending the people on the other side.
Sitting at a lunch counter that was segregated and refusing to move, that's not civil.
Right, there's nothing civil about that. You know, there's nothing civil about responding to somebody who you might think is making racist comments by raising your voice to them or telling them to knock it off. That's not civil, but would we really, you know, say that we want the government to tell you that you can't do that when that happens? That's no way to run a free society.
Thank you all. When we return...